Hey there. Thank you so much for joining us today on our stream here at our Lake Orion campus. My name is Sam Frangione, and we are glad that you've decided to take some time out of your morning, out of your day, to spend it with us. And I believe that God is going to speak to you. I believe that He wants to, that He desires to. There's a verse in the book of James that says, when we draw near to God, He draws near to us. And so that's what you're doing right now. And so I'm just grateful that you've decided to make that decision today, just to take this step. Now, just so you know, today we are going to be taking communion here in a little while, so you have some time if you want to, whether you're at home or wherever you're at, somewhere where you can grab maybe a piece of bread, crackers, whatever, and maybe some juice or something like that to be able to take part in that with us wherever you're watching and joining us from. We would love for you to be able to take part in that moment as well. As we're in our second week of this series we're calling Broken and Beautiful. Our lead pastor, Kirk McGlasson, is here to talk us through really we're focusing on this art of Kintsugi. It's this art form where they take broken pottery and it's essentially, you think about something that's broken. It's worthless. What's the point of trying to do anything with something that's broken? We would throw that away. But what they do is they take this broken pottery and they put it back together and they seal it. The way that they do it is by using gold. And so it's this idea of taking something that's broken and actually making it better than it ever was. And we're looking then through that, what does God have to say about that? What does that look like for our lives where we have brokenness in us? We've experienced different things over time. What does that look like for you? You're going to have a chance to hear and I believe be encouraged through Craig. But by the Spirit of God, I believe to see what God wants to do in you and maybe even through you in the lives of others around you. So thank you so much for deciding to join us today. I do believe and hope that God speaks to you today and this morning. So thanks again for joining. I hope that you're encouraged by the service. Thanks for joining.
Good morning, Kensington. How are you doing? Morning. Hey, there we go. Good morning. Hey, go ahead and stand to your feet if you would with us. We're going to sing here in just a moment, but before we do, I want to kind of set up where we're going. And so in Luke chapter 15, a parable Jesus tells it is, really the heart of Kensington, where Jesus goes after the one. He leaves the 99 and goes after the one. And so if you've been with Kensington for any time, you know that parable. But this morning, as we enter into worship, we're going to sing a song that says, I'm pursuing you, Jesus, and I want to kind of catch fire so that way people who see me see you. It's basically the gist of the song, is that I'm laying down my life, giving up control to you. And for the sake of the world, burn like a fire in me. I want to be you. I want to go after the one. Jesus said that if we raise him up, he would draw all men into himself. And so what we want to do this morning is to catch fire for him, so that way we can go after the one like he is going after the one, to pursue the one, so that way they can participate in this great body that we call the church. And so as we prepare our hearts this morning, as we step into worship, let that be the guiding focus of your worship this morning, is that, Lord, as we sing the song, as we lay down our lives, help me to catch fire for the one, so that way they would all come to know your name. I'm laying down my life, giving up control, never looking back. I surrender all. I'm living for your glory on the earth. the stirring in my soul to see the nations bow, for all the world to know I'm living for your glory on the earth. So this is where we sing. If you know it, sing it out. For the sake of the world, burn like a fire in me, light a flame in my soul for every eye to see. For the sake of the world, burn like a fire in me. We're going to sing that again. Let's raise up our voices, raise up our hearts to Jesus this morning. Here we go, sing it out. This passion in my heart, this stirring in my soul, to see the nations bow, for all the world to know I'm living for your glory on the earth. Let's lift up our voices, sing it out this morning. For the sake of the world, burn like a fire in me, light a flame in my soul for every eye to see. For the sake of the world, burn like a fire in me. That's our prayer. Sing it again. For the sake of the world, burn like a fire in me, light a flame in my soul for every eye to see. For the sake of the world, burn like a fire in me, like a fire in me. For every knee to bow down, for every heart to believe, for every voice to cry out, burn like a fire in me. For every tongue to confess that you alone are the King, you are the hope of the earth. Burn like a fire in me. For the sake of the world, burn like a fire in me, light a flame in my soul for every eye to see. For the sake of the world, burn like a fire in me. For the sake of the world, for the sake of the world, burn like a fire in me, light a flame in my soul for every eye to see. For the sake of the world, burn like a fire in me. If that's you, come on, let's lift up His praise this morning. Yes. Sing that one more time. For the sake. For the sake of the world, light a flame in my soul. For the sake of the world, burn like a fire in me.
Good morning, Orion. Hey, would you just take a minute before you take a seat? Just turn around, be friendly, say hello to somebody near you. Let them know you're glad that they're here today. So this time of year, there's one of two types of people. There's those of you that have already started listening to Christmas music, hands, and then there's normal people. So I'm glad you guys are with us. This is also the time of year where we celebrate something else. Anybody know? Thank you. One person in this whole room. I swear to you, I'm going to turn you all from football fans to hunting fans in time. Just give me a minute. So tomorrow's opening day. You're like, yeah, who really cares about that? So, well, that's when I celebrate Christmas, and that's when I play music. So this time of year is not just, obviously, Christmas music. It is tradition for us as well to do a few things here. One of the things, if you've been with us over the last number of years, you know as part of the tradition this time of year is that we take pause and start to look at all of our global partners and just celebrate what God has been doing this last year in anticipation of what we think he wants to do next year. So we've got a video for the next few minutes with our founder, Steve Andrews, who is going to kind of walk us through just some of the partners that God has been so good as to allow us to have over the last number of years. For those of you who don't know, we have 10 global partners. Some of them have been partners for many years, some of them for a few years. All of them are doing incredible work all around the world. Much of it is the result of our partnership and your generosity, and so we just want to celebrate, and that's part of what I want to do for the next few minutes. So if you just give your attention to the screen, these are our partners. This is Steve, and we're going to take a minute to celebrate what God has allowed us to be a part of.
In Luke 11, one of the things that Jesus teaches is the reality that there is no space on planet Earth that is unclaimed spiritual territory. Our call is to fight for every inch of planet Earth to be claimed for Jesus Christ.
Kensington, we believe that we are called to show the love of God by meeting the needs in His name around the world. That's why we're investing resources and building long-term relationships with global partners in 10 different countries. These Indigenous global partners understand their communities and their unique needs around them. They are passionate about bringing Jesus to their people, and we get to come alongside them to support the incredible work that they are doing. In Brazil, Kensington partners with CTPI. This church planting movement, led by Ricardo Agreste, is making a lasting impact in Brazil by starting new Christ-centered churches, training leaders, and supporting planters in residence. CTPI has had some church plants recently become self-sufficient, while others have focused on meeting the greatest needs in their communities due to the pandemic, whether that's food and water deliveries, essential services, or virtual Bible studies.
Ricardo and his team are the best first world missional movement I know of anywhere for making disciples who make disciples. But they're also in a more adverse environment. It has not discouraged them from supporting current, future church leaders, starting a new movement of God, starting it all over Brazil.
In the Dominican Republic, Kensington partners with Go Ministries as they transform whole communities through youth programs, church planning, medical care, and community development. They are involved in communities, which includes 38 neighborhood churches and 41 prison churches.
They had this modest goal of just getting prison ministry started, and all of a sudden we've got 41 prison churches. So the inmates themselves are becoming the apostles, and the church planters, they're the people that are doing these incredible baptisms. I mean, how can you not be moved by this?
For several years, Kensington has discreetly partnered with an organization and a small network of brave individuals to bring the good news of Jesus to the people of Afghanistan. Our partners' focus has been on church planning, resourcing believers, and Bible distribution. When the Taliban established control several months ago, the people of Kensington gave with open-handedness, supporting the evacuation of more than 5,000 people in this period of extreme violence and danger. Our partners' leaders hope to step up evacuation efforts as they see the window of opportunity closing rapidly. They recently got access to raised funds, allowing them to provide much-needed food and medical care.
Evangelism and discipleship are exploding in this restricted country. We have 1,000 students that have entered seminary training. These leaders are starting to move into restricted countries, into other places of the world.
Our partners' house-based movement continues to spread, bringing fellowship, discipleship, and Bible study to thousands of people. During the pandemic, 1,005 house churches were started. In India, our partner Jaya and his organization, Christ Evangelical Mission, or CEM, meets all kinds of needs among the poorest in India, from elder and orphan care to community development and skill training for women. During the second wave of COVID, with hospitals beyond capacity, CEM's private hospital was converted into a life-saving COVID treatment center at the request of the Indian government. The required upgrades and equipment were provided by you, the people of Kensington. Over $200,000 was raised, and the hospital was made ready to serve their community.
I don't know why, but I'm always surprised of God moving in unexpected places, but we did not expect COVID to open this gigantic door with the Indian government for the CEM ministry to expand their hospital to a full service connection of serving the poor and seeing God expand that ministry in a way we had not been able to do in the past.
In Nepal, our partner, Ramesh Sapkota, has been rescuing and restoring girls from human trafficking for nearly 30 years. His organization, Our Daughters International, and their partners are committed to bringing rescued victims through the healing process and helping them to become leaders and business owners in their respective villages.
We had a small safe house that's capacity of 20 girls at a time, and we were desperately needing another safe home. We were praying God to give us the safe home. And that's where the Kensington whole community stood with us. And we are ever thankful. They provided us resources to build the second safe home. Second safe home gonna accommodate about 40 girls at a time. And I would like to say through the Kensington community, thank you so much for your investments.
In Kenya and South Sudan, Kensington has a longtime partner with Julius Murgor and his successor, Reuben Miracle. Their organization is meeting physical and spiritual needs among the Pokot tribe in Kenya and 3 tribes in South Sudan.
Julius and I started dreaming about reaching the Pokot Nation in 1985, but in 2003, we made a commitment to each other, every Pokot person coming to Christ, that there be a church and clean water in every village, that every Pokot kid could have access to education. I mean, this is a holistic vision.
The greatest thing that is happening in Kenya is the Clean Water Initiative that is reaching and transforming so many lives. It continues to give opportunity for sharing the good news of Jesus Christ.
Over the past 20 years, Julius and his team have raised up hundreds of fantastic leaders. But there was something unique about Reuben, as he was a very young man starting churches in Kenya and Uganda, over a dozen, and then he and Lois answering the call of planting 50 or 60 or more churches now in South Sudan. We've realized that Reuben was to be the next leader of the Pokot Outreach Ministries movement, and it is exciting to have him in place for the next 20, 30, or 40 years.
Church is growing, and that shows really lives are being transformed. We did a baptism recently of 104 people. And we did it in a pool that previously it had a crocodile in it. But it used to have a crocodile, so all this that we are doing, the greatest support comes from Kensington. And even the seeds that we distributed to the farmers last year, many families received the seeds, 1,400 families. But above that, I was telling them it was an opportunity. We leverage all this to point to Jesus and the love of Jesus.
What you have just seen absolutely overflows my heart with joy. Years ago as a boy, I dreamed of serving under great leaders from around the world, men and women who were following Christ in their difficult places. And we are living that dream. These people have taught us what it means to follow Jesus Christ. And I feel such an overwhelming gratitude to God for allowing us to be a part of that. But there's a second part of this, and it's an overwhelming gratitude to you. I mean, your love and your partnership, your financial sacrifice in supporting these movements of God in the world over the last decades absolutely floors me. Your willingness to step in. And this is why we do what we do. This is why when we come to year end, you're considering all the opportunities you have to give and invest. We say, this is an investment that is infinitely worth our lives. And so many of you have gotten to meet some of these people, and so many of you have gotten to go. But we know that we are living a dream that very few people will ever get to experience as we experience Jesus Christ across the whole world.
So next week is Baptism Sunday, and I have an idea. I think we're going to put a crocodile in the tank, or at least a small alligator. No alligator. So Reuben, one of the things that's cool about Reuben, I've had the chance to get to meet him more lately and spend a little bit of time with him, is he is like a little kid with new experiences. He just loves the new experiences that he gets every time he comes over here. So that's kind of become a goal, is to get him to something he's never experienced before. Reason I wasn't here last week, anybody that noticed, is that I was actually with a gathering of people from around the world that Reuben was a part of, and so many other people like him that we're partnered up with through an organization called TTI, the Timothy Initiative. It's one of our partners. And it was an annual gathering to just celebrate what God's been doing, share stories, to bring in some of these men and women from literally some of the most remote regions of the world and hear what God is doing. Just incredible work that's being accomplished. So Reuben was there and we spent some time together. It was so funny. At one point, he was sharing how he's never been on a roller coaster. And at some point, his goal is, I want to be on a roller coaster. So there's a few of us there that were like, hey, next time you're in Michigan, we got to go down to this place called Cedar Point. So there was a guy that overheard the whole conversation. He goes, next time, wait, how about now time? So he goes, I got a buddy, because we were down in Naples, Florida. He goes, I got a buddy that's in Orlando who he can get you in tomorrow to Disney. So he sets this whole thing up and actually got him into You should have seen Reuben. When he came back, he's like, all right, it's all set. Tomorrow you're going to Disney. He was like, oh. He was like thrilled. So I'm waiting any day now to get some pictures of him on a roller coaster. When we were down there, it was an incredible experience of hearing stories like Reuben's and like many that you just heard from all around the world. I want to tell you really quickly about just one. There was this one night that there's probably, like I said, about 400 of us gathered. And some are partners here in the States, and some are partners overseas. And there was a video that they showed to us that was literally filmed maybe a week and a half earlier. And it was one of our partners in northern India, in a region that is very hostile to churches. So this guy has planted a church. He's leading it. They're seeing a ton of growth. They're seeing disciples made, impact. But the community isn't having it. So the community leaders have rallied together, and they kicked his kids out of school. He's not allowed to send his kids to the school anymore. They've not allowed him to shop in the market in the village. And even the area where they go to get water, he's been told he can't access water there. To boot, on top of all of that, he is struggling through the fact that he just lost his wife from cancer back in the early part of the year. He has 3 kids. The oldest, I believe, is about 15, 2 girls and a boy. And so he sat down in front of his phone and shared that story and some of those details and other details. And while he was sharing them, at one point, he also shared that the community is rallying against him, that there's a flyer that's literally going around the area calling on community leaders, community residents to do harm to him. And so he shared that there's a very real possibility that he may not be alive a year from now. And so he's sharing all this, and at one point he gets choked up, and he's talking about his kids, and he's sharing that story. And I mean, this is one of those pin drop moments. He never once asked that we would get him out of there. He didn't ask that the violence would stop or the threats would stop. Here's what he asked that we would be faithful to do. And it's pray that he would be faithful to stay the course. I've never in my life watched a video of somebody who literally has an entire community seeking his head because of the gospel, who says, just pray for me that I stay the course. There's a place, I've mentioned this to you before, there's a place in the book of Hebrews that talks about some of the men and women of our faith, our ancestors, whose shoulders we stand on. And the author of Hebrews says the world is not worthy of them. I have had an unbelievable privilege in the last couple of weeks to go to Kenya and then down even in Florida, meeting with this gathering of men and women like this, that I would say I have genuinely been meeting men and women recently that the world is not worthy of. Men and women that most of you will never meet, but here's the incredible thing, all of you have an opportunity to impact. And that's why I will never, ever apologize for asking you to consider Kensington when we come into Christmas. Everybody's coming up with their Christmas list, right? Everybody's like, oh, don't forget this person, don't forget that person. Everybody but my son. I'm gonna have to remind him wherever he's at, create your Christmas list, boy. So he always leaves his family out for some reason. But every one of us are creating Christmas lists. This person and this person. I would just say, here's my ask to you. Would you consider us? Would you consider Kensington as a year-end gift as we move into this next year, planting a seed of confidence, hope, and faith that more people like Reuben are gonna be raised up and more regions like the ones he's at in Kenya and others in India and in Nepal and in so many other places in the world are gonna be reached for the gospel because of the generosity of people like you. So I'm just gonna ask it as we move through the next couple of weeks and get to watch more videos like this and more stories like this of people who are giving it all for the gospel. People like the man that we met when we were in Florida who's in Vietnam, and he said, it's costing us our blood. Literally, he told stories of people that are being beat, some that are being killed. He said, it's costing us our blood to pursue the gospel impact in our communities. And then he looked at us all and said, we'll give every drop of it if it's what's required. These are the stories we get to support. These are the stories that we get to help make happen. And so I'm just asking that as we go into the end of the year that you would just prayerfully ask God, what would you have us do? I want to be the people that say yes. You may never be the people that go, but you can be the people that say yes to help those around the world that though we may never meet, you have the chance to impact. So some of you are involved in that on a regular basis with us. This isn't a new thing for you or just a year-end thing. You give on a regular basis, and I just want to continue to say thank you to you. Because we're not just reaching people around the seas, around the world, we're reaching people right here around our neighborhoods as well. So those of you that aren't a part of that, here's how you can join in if you want to. On your screen, there's several ways that we do that here at Kensington. And I just always want to say thank you for your partnership, for your generosity, and for the reality that there are lives that know the Savior and the King of creation because so many of you consistently say yes with what God's put in your hand to be generous. So appreciate you for doing that and thank you for that. So we're gonna go ahead and turn into our message this morning and turn to the series that we have been in. Week 2, started last week. Sam Anderson kicked us off. I don't know if you were here. If you were here, Sam did a great job, didn't he? Leading us into the first part of the series. One of you whistled, one of you really enjoyed Sam. There you go, Sam. You got one fan here in the room. It's good. So I can't tell you how much I continue to appreciate Sam being a part of this team and what he brings here. You'll get to hear more and more from him in the weeks to come. But Sam really led us in one thought that it's kind of the overarching for the series and really did a great job kind of leaning us into it and mining it out for the morning last week. And it's this thought. As created beings, we are a reflection of the being that created us. And part of that reflection in us of our Creator is an innate ability and design to create ourselves. And that doesn't mean that we're all gonna be artists or painters or poets or musicians or be able to frame in a house. What it means is that the way that God has designed the human soul is it has an ability to create into the souls of other people. I hope you know this, but the greatest thing you will ever create in this life is going to be created in the context of relationship. Do you know that? Do we believe that? It's not gonna be created in your job. It's not gonna be created in your portfolio. It's not gonna be created in the industry you build or the empire you create. The greatest thing you will ever create will happen in the context of relationship. But if we are creators and have the ability to create into the lives of other people, then like any artist, we can create things that are powerful and beautiful. We can also create things that aren't. One of the, I think, best examples of our ability to create for me has always been in being a parent. I mean, the whole experience of being a parent is the experience of creating. Even just recently, my daughters went to the EDGE retreat. So EDGE and Breakaway, our junior high, senior high group, they had a weekend retreat a couple weeks ago called Wild. I think we sent 100 students from our campus to that retreat. My girls are staring me down right now. They're like, we have no idea what you're about to say. And on the way to that retreat, we were in the car and I was taking them and dropping them off here at the campus. And I can't even remember exactly what we were talking about. You'll probably remind me later, but it was some relationship thing. And all I know is that there was a moment where I was just venting about someone. And I'm like, it's one of those moments where you just know as a parent on the other side of it, you're like, probably not a good choice. And so I thought after a minute, I was like, I should probably apologize to them. That wasn't a wise thing to do. I should have said everything different. And so I said, hey, girls, I want to apologize. I do feel those things, but I didn't express that right. That wasn't the right way for me to handle that. And I didn't talk well about that person, so I want to apologize. So my daughter, Corinne, says to my other daughter, Jocelyn, she goes, hey, Jocelyn, you know why Dad's apologizing, right? She goes, he wants to set a good example. And she air quotes me. I'm like, what are you doing? And then she goes, too late, Dad, example's already set. I'm like, what the heck? She gets that attitude from her mom, I think. I'm like, Corinne, but we have these moments, right? Where we look back as a parent, as non-parents, as people. We have moments where we look at what's being created. And sometimes we're proud of it, and sometimes we celebrate it. And there's other times where we go, that's not what I wanted to create. That's not who I want to be. That's not what I want to do. I mean, that's a silly, simple example with my daughter. But there's plenty of times in my life where I can look at moments that are much bigger than that, moments where I step back and I'm kind of like Paul in the New Testament when he wrote, I do what I don't want to do and I don't do what I do want to do, and moments where I'm just like, dang it, why did I do that? Or why did I do that again? Or why did I say that? Am I alone? Anybody with me? You have those moments where you feel, especially for those of us walking with Jesus and we have come to believe that there is a God and he is Jesus, that there are moments that we just know that is not how I have been created to create. And then sometimes there's other moments where the creation of our lives is something that happens to us. There are moments that we can create broken things, but there are other moments where broken things get created for us on our behalf. That's why when you've got an iPhone that breaks, what do you do with it? When it's broken, what do? You replace it. When you've got a coffee mug that is of no value and it breaks, what do? You throw it away. What do you do when you're what's broken? What about when it's something from you? And brokenness is broad. Because like I said, sometimes the brokenness in our lives is something that we do. It's a way that we're living. It's a way that we're behaving. It's a way we're treating other people. It's a habit. It's a sin. It's an addiction. There are moments that what's broken comes directly from our decisions. There's other moments that what's broken comes from decisions that somebody else put on us. Or maybe it's just even life and how it hit us. So if our tendency is with broken things to either replace them or pitch them, what do we do when we're what's broken? Even more, what does God do? Like, what is his thinking towards us when we're what's broken? When if we truly are made in the design and in the image of the designer, what does the designer do in response to us when we don't function how he made us? When there's a brokenness in us? So the reason we called this morning Kintsugi is because there's an art form that probably some of you are aware of, but I've only recently been made aware of, called Kintsugi. And we're going to watch a video in a minute of a Kintsugi artist teaching us not just what it is as an art, but how it is a reflection of what God does in our life. Because at the shell, what Kintsugi is the ability to take broken things, and here's what's so powerful, not just fix them, but to turn them into something even more valuable than before they broke. So I just want you to watch this for a few minutes because it's going to set some direction for us today, and I think even give a fuller understanding to the text that we're going to be in this book. Here you go.
The world is predicated upon mending what is broken. And this reality of how the Kintsugi bowl is more valuable than the original really speak to the restorative, redemptive process of the gospel. Kintsugi is this art form of mending broken shards of pottery. Kin means gold and tsugi means to mend. So you are reconnecting the broken pieces, but doing it in a way that is beautiful, and it's an art form of its own. Kintsugi speaks about conditions of trauma and brokenness, ground zero conditions, valuing what you have rather than this disposable culture. Kintsugi is not just fixing, but it's creating into an opportunity of brokenness. And so that is a redemptive journey that leads to new creation.
こういうとこなんだ。
そう、ここ古いジャズバーで50年ぐらい前から。10年ぐらい前からワークショップはやってたんですけど、やっぱり震災が一度あってね、311の時に、その後すごい注文が突然増えたんですよ。だけど結局ちょっと落ち着いた時に、何を直そうかっていうと、意外とみんな直したかったのは器なんですよね。なんか例えば家が流されちゃっても器だけ残っちゃったりするんですよ。だけどその傷をなんかこう自分自身の傷を直すのは難しいけど、器を直したりするとなんかちょっと修復されたような気持ちになるっていうのがあると思うんですよね。
そういうコミュニケート、その自然体でいることがアートとその金継ぎっていうものと、やっぱり安全地帯、そのものがある力が癒す力で、
直してると全然違う感じがちょっとしますよね、やっぱりね。なんか直してるっていうよりも何か作ってることにちょっと近づいてる感じの、その中間ぐらいのイメージですかね。
そうですよね、両方でしょ、やっぱり直してるんだけど新しいものを考
そうですね、
えてるっていう、
なんか完璧なものってやっぱちょっとなんかそこから先がない気がするんだけど、不完全なものってやっぱすごく嬉しいですよね。完璧なところには完璧なものが収まるし、ちょっと不完全なところには不完全なものがやっぱ引き寄せられるみたいなのがあると思います。だから器を買いに行っても僕は欠けてる器しか買わないんですけど、今なんかこう欠けてるものになんかすごくこう異常ななんか美しさみたいなのを感じるっていうか。
Kintsugi concept can be applied in many different ways. We say we fix the soil, which means not to restore the soil but to amend it. Right? So you add elements to it that makes the soil come alive. So when you plant something in there, it thrives. That's an interesting parallel because understanding the health of the earth already has elements of Kintsugi in it.
金継ぎっていうのは単なる修理じゃないんですよね。すごく時間と時間をくっつけたり、記憶と記憶をくっつけたりする特別ななんか魔法みたいな感じがするんですよ。
Creative minds fix upon these traumatic events in history. If you removed all of the novels and art forms that came directly out of trauma, you would lose 80% of the world's art. You would not have Hemingway, you would not have J.D. Salinger, you would not have Dante, you would not have Milton. The world would be decimated. It's a very significant way of understanding art and literature, and more importantly, our communities and a way of processing the past, finding healing, to be able to sow seeds of hope in the midst of conflict. We tend to want to run away from these conflicts and traumas, but it is the very heart of what the arts represents.
そうやって金継ぎをずっと続けることによって本当に世界の見え方が全部変わってくる感じがすごいするんですよ。完璧に仕上げるよりもちょっと未完成な方がさっきまでボロボロだと思った器にこう黄金の川が流れてるっていうふうに自分がこう感じるようになってくるんですよね。
Kintsugi reminds us that sometimes instead of throwing away things of the past, that it's good to work to mend, and to do it beautifully. To me, how the gospel reads is Christ came not just to fix us, but to restore us to create something new, which is more valuable than what we began with.
So that video was shared with us by an organization called Windrider Productions. It was just very gracious to let us use that free of charge. And there's so much to there's so much to think about in what they said, so many things that he points out. But the one that really struck me every time I've watched it is he made the comment that imperfect places attract imperfect things. And I think here's what's so incredible about Jesus is that our imperfect places attracted a perfect being who says, if you will just take your broken parts and put it in my hands, I don't just fix it. I actually transform it into something priceless. I don't even make it just what it was. I make it something more. So this morning, what we want to talk about is how it is that God does that with our brokenness. Whether it's brokenness that you've created or whether it's brokenness that's hit you without your choosing. All of it is something that I think God has the ability to take and to not just mend, but turn into something priceless, more valuable than even before it broke. I want to spend a minute just asking that our Creator would speak to us and would create within us the ability to hear and understand Him this morning. But I want to do something that I think our staff was talking about this, especially with today's content and topic being brokenness. There's a family that many of you know of, some of you know personally, that is in a moment of brokenness right now, the Santo family. Some of you have seen the story in the news. Some of you were maybe at the rally yesterday at Adams where 600 people showed up. It's an 18-year-old young man who just graduated last year from Adams. His name is Brendan, who a couple of weeks ago disappeared. And they have been trying to find him. He was visiting friends for the MSU game. He was at the MSU campus. And after he left one of the gatherings where he was at with some friends, he hasn't been able to be found since. And I just want us to join for a moment in prayer, like happened yesterday. Prayer for that family, prayer certainly for him to be found and found safe and well. So here's what I would ask you to do for a minute. I know for many of us, praying is a part of your rhythm with Jesus. I hope it is for all of you that are walking with Jesus. So I would just ask, I'm gonna give some moment for silence here, and I would ask that you just, where you're at, just pray, and pray how God leads you to pray for the family. If you're not a praying person, you're like, that's not really something I do, I would just ask you to just kind of sit in the silence with us, and maybe let your heart feel tied to the heart of this family in compassion for what they're going through. And then after a minute, I'm gonna kind of wrap us back up and I'll pray for us. So for the next minute, if you could just go to silence and prayer. Father, as I think of this family, especially myself having an 18-year-old son, I can't imagine the sense of pain that they're feeling right now and confusion. And just being aware that there is a brokenness in this life, a kind of brokenness that nothing can fix but you, that nothing can mend but you, that nothing can give comfort to but you. No words, no ideas, no human being, no matter what we offer in presence or in compassion, can enter into certain places and types of brokenness the way that you can. So God, that would be, I think, many of our prayer here today, is that you would step into this situation with this family in a way to provide comfort. Let your presence be so present to them in ways that I wouldn't even know how to ask, that are just so supernaturally beyond what I could even conceive, that I couldn't put words to it, but you know how to be present in that way to people. I felt it, some of us here have felt it, and would you provide that to this family, to this mom, to this dad? God, we of course pray that this young man would be found, that he would be found alive and healthy. We pray that you would work this situation to a good end. But I pray that whatever the end is, God, that you would somehow enter into this whole mess and that you would present yourself as the God who is present, the God who is compassionate, understanding, and loving. God, I pray that as we also open up your scriptures this morning, that you would make sense of stories that happened, but happened so long ago that sometimes being so far removed from our life and our day and age that they can seem like simply a story instead of an account of what happened to show us what still does. And I pray that you would, through that, God, enter into our own brokenness. For many of us in this room, there are places in our own lives right now where we need your mending hand to do what only you can do. And I pray that for those of us maybe that are in a great place in life right now, that there is no touch of brokenness that we're experiencing at the moment, that what we would feel is a sense of compassion to pray for and to care for someone that maybe we're aware of in life that is feeling brokenness. But all of this, God, today, I pray more than anything else, Jesus, would your voice be heard? Would you speak clearly? Would we know more than before we came in of the great compassion and love that you have for us, that according to your scripture is immeasurable? No height, no depth, no width could combine it or contain it. And I pray that we'd know that more today. In Jesus' name, amen. So I've shared before that when I grew up a bit of a church rat. Like, I was in church my whole life. My parents only started going to church about a year before I was born. So it was a very new experience for them. It was not a new experience for me. I mean, it just became my experience, became my life. And my earliest experience that I can remember of my entire life was at 5 years old. And it was also the first time I genuinely believe I had an encounter with God. It was very simple, but it was very real. I think I've shared this a few times before, but I was in this classroom. Mrs. Jessie was a teacher. I remember sitting on the floor. We had one of those like big rope carpets. You guys remember the rope carpets? I don't know. I was a kid, so it was a race car track for me. That's what I did. I was a squirrely little kid, wasn't paying attention. There was one Sunday, all I remember is sitting there on that rug, Mrs. Jessie teaching, always probably wanted to pull her hair out because of us. The window was open, so it had to be a nicer day, probably summer, spring, and something just clicked. And it was like all of a sudden, this being that everybody else would talk about became somebody more than just a being everybody else talked about. Like, he really became real to me in a way I can't entirely put into words. Some of you have had that experience. You've had that moment where it's like God became something more than an idea. He actually became somebody you knew and that you had an encounter with. And so I began to grow up in that in the church. And I had very simple experiences even after that. But again, they were very real experiences to me where God became very personal to me, became very real to me. Unfortunately, I also had other experiences in that church, like many of you have had, whether you grew up in church or didn't grow up in church. Some of you have had the experience where the voices in that church began to create a picture of God, which was not who he was, and began to create an image of God separate than who God really is. And especially for me, that started to happen in moments of brokenness, where I would do something, say something, where I would live something out, where suddenly what I felt from the church was not the joy of Jesus, the healing of Jesus, the ability to Jesus to step into my brokenness. Instead, what I felt was more like Jesus was just Thor the Thunder God. You know what I mean? Like big hammer, just waiting all the time, like angry grandpa. You're in the family, but he's always mad at you, and he's just ready to hit you with the hammer when you mess up. So I kid you not, this is literally like the face. Here's the consistent face that was in my mind of Jesus. Whenever I'd think of him, that was kind of him. Like, he just kind of always had this little bit of an angry scowl on his face, always ready for me to mess something up. And then if I really messed something up, this was the face I'd usually have in my head. Right? Like, not the Jesus you want to meet. But anybody else honest enough to say, like, yeah, that image has been in your mind before? There's been times people painted that picture. I will tell you, even to this day, I still have trouble sometimes when I've really done something broken, or even moments where something broken has happened to me. I have a hard time not having that pop up in my head and believe that that's how God looks at me. So here's what I want to do in part today. I want to recreate the face of God for you towards your brokenness and his posture. So here's how I want to start doing that. If you have a Bible, go ahead and open them up. If not, these are going to be on the screen. But we're going to read a passage that was written by the Apostle Paul to a church he started in Corinth. It's called 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 5. For what we preach is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, let light shine out of darkness, made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of, watch this, God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. So he's telling us something. He's telling us that in the face of Jesus is the glory of God being displayed to us. But then Paul also goes on to talk about just our present reality in life. So he's combining two ideas, where we see the presence and the glory of God in the face of Jesus and the reality of our life at times. He says this, verse 7, but we have this treasure in jars of clay. That's us. We're the jars of clay, the things created by the Creator. What's the treasure? Jesus. He says, so we have this treasure in jars of clay to show us in this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. Why? Why do we need that? Verse 8, because we are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. Any of that resonate with anything you felt in the last year? Pressed, crushed, perplexed, persecuted, struck down. I mean, I think it's an easy argument to say that's a list of things that add them all up, the equal sign is broken. Like if any part of that resonates with your life, or any other adjective you'd put in place of those resonates with your life, that's moments of brokenness. That's an experience of brokenness. Here's what I love so much that Paul says. It's in that context that Paul says, here's what God's face is towards you. It's not a face of anger and rejection. It is a face that displays the glory of God. It's in Christ's face. That's his posture towards us, not that face. He says the face of God towards you can be seen in the face of Jesus, and it is a face of light, and it is a face of power, it is a face of glory. It is not a face of rejection. It is not a face of anger. How we believe God looks at us oftentimes determines our outlook on life. That's the truth I want us to understand this morning. But here's the example I want us to see it in. In your Bibles, there's a book called Mark. Mark chapter 5 is where we're going to go. The book of Mark is a collection. Some of you know this, some of you may not. 4 different books in the Bible called the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. These are the books that deal exclusively with Jesus, his life, his teachings, his miracles. So in one of these moments in the book of Mark, there is an account of an interaction that Jesus had with 2 different people that I think is a perfect example of both how God postures himself towards us in our broken moments, but also how he enters into them. So here we go, Mark chapter 5, this is what we read. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was at the lake. And then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet and he pleaded with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." And so Jesus went with him. I'm going to pause for a minute. We're going to be in this all the way up to verse, 42. So stay here, don't close it, don't lose it. 2 things I want you to note right off the bat. Number 1, this is a broken dad. This is a broken man. You want to break me, mess with my kids. You're the same if you're a parent. It's one of the quickest ways to get to us and break us and wreck us. I've been there. You've been there if you're a parent. You want to mess with anybody. You want to mess with a man. You want to mess with a woman. You mess with their kids. That'll put you in a place of brokenness. Listen to what he even said when he came. He didn't just say, "My daughter." What did he say? "My what?" Do you remember? Read it. "My what daughter?" This is a dad pouring out affection and word for his little daughter. He's saying, listen, I am broken, I am desperate, I am reaching out to you. First thing to note is the story begins with a broken man. Second thing to note, Jesus is in the midst of a crowd that wants something from him. There's adrenaline, there's energy, it's loud, it's exciting. Like, this is a great place to be. This is not where he stays. Jesus ends up turning, because it says he goes with him. The second thing to note here is that Jesus turns all of his attention away from the high energy, adrenaline, pumped up, excited crowd, and instead gives 100% of his energy and attention to the downcast, depressed, desperate, broken dad. That's where all of his energy goes. Here's why that's important. Sometimes there's this idea that God leans more towards the people that are better and happy. Better and happy than what? I don't know, than you, than me, than whoever. Like God probably likes us, but he's probably more into the people that seem to have their life together and they're just happier. Like they got a better outlook, they're positive. So the people that got a little bit of junk, a little bit of brokenness, a little bit of depressed, maybe anxious, life's not feeling all that great, they're a little bit down, like God may not be looking at them quite as much. Do not miss that he turns away from the adrenaline crowd and he gives all of his attention to the broken dad. You know, one of the people I've seen do this the best, honestly, is Steve Andrews, our founding pastor here. That guy is amazing at this. I have watched him where he will stand in the lobby at places and he will talk and share and listen and just be present in a moment, so much so that people are like, Steve, you got a sermon to give. He's like, I don't care about the sermon. I'm in this moment. Like, I just love watching him do that. This is a guy that wants to be like Jesus in this moment. I don't care about the crowd always. I don't care about the big. I care about the moment that there is a broken person that needs my attention and affection. This is Jesus in that moment with this dad. But here's what happens next. So he's going with this guy. He's traveling to go see the daughter. There's a little bit of a crowd that begins to follow with him, and this is what happens. A large crowd followed and pressed in around him. And a woman who was there, who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, was in the crowd. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had. And yet, instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard of Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and she touched his cloak because she thought to herself, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. And immediately when she did, her bleeding stopped and she felt in her body that she had been freed from her suffering. So a couple things in there make it clear that there's a story, but I want to unpack just a little bit of it and give some detail. So it says that she's been bleeding for 12 years. This is a condition that you'll better understand the community's reaction to her if you read Leviticus 15. It's the Old Testament book in the Bible. There is a law, there is a reaction to a woman with her condition, and the reaction in the law is that she's to be pushed to the outskirts of the city, to the outskirts of the community. She's seen as vile, she's seen as broken. She's even believed about her that there's something that she's done wrong, that possibly God's curse is on her. So this is a woman very much shoved to the fringes of society. This is also a woman that, according to this text, has not only been in this condition for 12 long years, but she's spent everything she's had to try and get help. She's gone to doctor after physician after doctor. Nobody's been able to help. She's spent all of her money. So add up the equation of her life to this moment. Broken plus desperate plus poor plus rejected. I mean, this is not a place anybody wants to be, and yet some of us have been there to some degree or another. One element of that or another has been true about some of our lives, and this is her life. And because she's the person who is told, you don't belong here, this has been the message to her whole life. Not only do you not belong with us, you don't belong with God. You don't belong in his presence, you don't belong in our presence. That's why she's kind of ninjaing into the crowd. It says she kind of sneaks in, grabs, and you can get this picture, like she's like, what? And then she just runs off and she gets healed all of a sudden. The reason is she knows she's not supposed to be there, and if she's identified, she's getting kicked out. So I've always had this kind of picture in my head of her. I don't know if she's got maybe something covering her head or her face is just down, but she's clearly making sure nobody recognizes me, because the minute they do, I'm not welcome here. Do you know that sometimes this is what we do, inadvertently and sometimes intentionally, with broken people? Is what we do is we send the message that you're really not welcome here. And we do that by sending messages like, hey, you need to just get better. You need to clean it up. You need to feel better. Come on, get over it. How long are you gonna whine about this? It happened, it's done. And sometimes we can inadvertently make people feel in moments of brokenness like they're not actually welcome here, and so they have to hide and cover it up. And you know, sometimes it's only because it makes us feel more comfortable when they're better. And I wonder if there's some of us that are sitting in this room, watching online, that are part of this community right now, that's your story. You're here, and you're maybe reaching out for God. This is part of your routine even. You come and you hope to reach out for him and take hold of him, have an experience with him, but there's part of you that wonders, like this woman, if he's actually gonna reach back, if he even wants anything to do with you. And then even more, I wonder if there's some of us here that feel like we have to put the mask on too, to a certain degree. Like if I stopped being cheery, if I stopped smiling, if I stopped responding to how are you with good, like if I actually got honest for a minute and vulnerable, like would people really want to see that broken part of me, the real me, the deeper parts of me? And I know we don't open ourselves up to everybody, but you know one of the saddest things about church sometimes is this should be the place where we can be the most vulnerable and the most real, and sometimes it's a place where we do the most hiding. Because we feel like we have to come in and we have to be somewhere we're not because people wouldn't accept us in our brokenness. I just wonder if sometimes we don't feel like this woman. I'm in the crowd, but I have to kind of hide who I am. I have to hide the real part of who I am in the crowd because I don't know how they would really receive me. And so here's this woman in the crowd hiding, getting what she needs from Jesus and trying to take off because she's not even sure how Jesus is going to respond to her. And I think the thing that presses her into this crowd with all of the fear and hesitation she may have had is that she was defaulting back to an Old Testament promise and prophecy about Jesus when he would come. This is something that another pastor helped me understand years ago and connected the dots to something that happened in a book called Micah we're going to put up on the screen that I think unlocks so much of what's taking place in this passage. So the book of Micah, here's what we read. But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his, say the word, wings. Say it, wings. Humor me, thank you. Wings. And you will go free, leaping with joy like calves led out to pasture. So here's this promise that gets attached to the Messiah who would come, that there would be healing in his wings. Well, what in the world does that mean? Well, the word here that's being used for wings can also be translated a variety of different ways. It can also mean edges, it can mean borders, and it can mean tassels. So one of the things that would have been true about Jesus as a Jew, and particularly as a Jewish rabbi, is that part of his wardrobe would have included a prayer shawl, just like this, that would have had tassels on it. Now, everything about a prayer shawl was very intentional, from its colors, to the width and the separation of the colors, to the tassels, to the way that it's tied, to the knots on it, and all of it ultimately was pointing to not just the sovereign creator, but also that as creator, he is sustainer. In other words, it was to point to God's instructions for life. If you do life with me, that's what makes life work. When you wander off from me, everything about life begins to break. So wearing this was very, not just ceremonial, it was meaningful. It was to be a visual reminder pointing to that God's instructions are, walk with me, and that's where life is found. So Jesus would have been wearing this with these tassels. So here's this woman in the crowd who you just have to wonder, did she remember that there was once a promise that when the Messiah would come, there would be healing in his wings? And she finds herself in this crowd where no one else has been able to help her. Not even certain how God himself would respond to her. But she rushes in and reaches and grabs the one place where she hopes and trusts and believes there will be power to heal her. And she experiences it. One of the things that I love about her story is that when she comes to Jesus, she doesn't bring him anything. She doesn't bring him an offering. She doesn't come and say, hey, I want to get involved in a ministry here. Sign me up. Where can I help? This is literally all she has to offer. I can reach. That's all I have. I have the ability to reach. And I am going to hope with every ounce of faith I can muster up that when I do and when I grab you, I'm going to find what I need. But that's all I have to offer you right now. All I have to offer is my open and my extended hand to grab you. And I don't know where you're at in life, obviously. I know some of your stories, and I know for some of us, there are some moments of brokenness that you're living through. And I know for some of you, just because I know people, and I know me, and I know I've done this, and I've been here, you're coming in and you're putting on the mask, not sure that you can be honest about that brokenness, not even sure, not just what the community will think of you, but what God would think of you. Can you really reach for him out of your brokenness? And I just want you to see how it is that Jesus responds to her, because it's how he responds to us. You go back to the text in Mark, it says this. At once, when Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, he turned around, and in the crowd he asked, who touched my clothes? I love this. Verse 31. People are crowding against you, his disciples answered, and you're going to ask who touched me? This is his disciples. They're such knuckleheads at times. They're like, dude, everybody's touching you. We're like shoulder to shoulder in this crowd. What do you mean who touched me? I touched you. Simon touched you. I think that guy touched you. We all touched you. And Jesus is like, no. I don't care who touched me. I want to know who reached for me. He's saying somebody touched me with belief and faith in desperation and brokenness that if they got hold of me, they'd get what they needed. I want to know who that was in the audience. I don't care who bumped my shoulder. I want to know who reached with faith that I have what they need. He says, who touched me? And so then the woman must have been close enough to overhear because she responds. Because Jesus keeps looking around to see who had done it. Verse 33, then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear. She still isn't even sure what Jesus is going to make of her. She has been so convinced by the crowd around her that the face of God is the angry face that she even comes in after getting healing and falls down trembling, not sure how he's going to react. And this is how he does. He said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. I wonder when the last time was that somebody called her a daughter. She's been called a lot of names. Outcast, broken, vile, rejected by God. And here the Son of God looks at her and says, daughter. He doesn't say woman. He doesn't call her by name. Even more intimate and affectionate, he says, daughter. Here's what can't be lost in this passage is Jesus was on the way to heal a dying daughter, and he came across a sick woman and made her his daughter. And he says, daughter, you are healed. I wonder what you think, not just that God sees when he looks at you, but what God says when he looks at you. Even in all of your brokenness, what do you think he says? I think three of the most important words in this whole passage were even before what he said, it's what he did. Maybe three of the most important words in all the Bible when it said here, he turned around. I've done this before shamefully in my own life where I've had a moment where somebody in my life had a broken thing that I didn't know what to do with. And you know, sometimes when we don't know what to do with somebody else's brokenness, we turn around too. We just turn around this way. Like, I don't know what to do. And just kind of go about life and our business. And I love to the brokenness of this woman, Jesus turns towards her, not away from her. What has she been told about the countenance, the posture in the face of Jesus up to this point? That he's angry, that he's frustrated, maybe even that what she's suffering is because he's punishing her. And in this moment, she actually comes face to face with him herself, and he turns towards her. He puts his countenance on her, and his face is a different message than the crowd. His face is, I am God, I can heal, I am with you, I am for you, and I can transform every bit of your brokenness into something priceless. His message was very different than the crowd's message. And I love too that in her transformation, he doesn't erase her past. Her past is still a part of her story. It's just no longer the defining part of it. That's Kintsugi. We read this story for 2,000 years now. We don't just read there was a woman who was healed. Part of her story is what she was healed from. That 12 years of suffering will always be a part of her story. But the main part of her story now is how God entered into that brokenness and brought healing to it. But here's the problem with this whole story, is that she isn't actually the one that Jesus was on the way to meet. So if you go back to the text, it says this in verse 35. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. So why bother the teacher anymore? You ever felt like you did reach and God didn't respond? Even worse, not just that he didn't respond, that you looked around and you saw him responding to everybody else. You're like, I reached. This guy reached. Jesus actually said, okay. He was going with him. And then all of a sudden he gets interrupted. And in the meantime of him helping somebody else, his daughter dies. I've been there before, where I've had a moment where I reached and I thought I was gonna get help. And then all of a sudden it seemed like God was giving help to somebody else. I saw things working out for other people. I saw prayers getting answered for other people. And in the midst of those moments, you can just feel very ignored. This is Jesus' response to that moment. Overhearing what they said, Jesus told them, do not be afraid, just believe. He didn't let anyone follow them except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw all the commotion with the people crying and wailing loudly. And he went in and he said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead but asleep. So they laughed at him. Maybe even some of you, that'd be your reaction. You're like, man, you don't know the brokenness I'm feeling. You don't know the brokenness I'm living through or facing. And maybe your reaction would be to even laugh, to be blowing me off, to blow God off. Be like, he can't do anything about this. You have no idea what you're talking about. He hasn't yet. Why would he? After they had put him out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and he went into where the child was. This is so powerful. And he took her by the hand. In the story we just read with the other woman, she took Jesus by her hand. In this story, Jesus takes this little girl by his hand. And it says here that he said to her, little girl, I say to you, get up. And immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. And at this, they were completely astonished. I love that Mark finishes the story because he could have stopped where he did with just the first woman with the bleeding issue. But I love that he goes on to tell the other story because what ends up happening is you have two people, both very broken, both very much needing Jesus, but in two entirely different scenarios. You have one who has suffered for 12 years of her life. You have another that's only achieved 12 years of her life. You have one that's on the brink of losing everything. You have another who has lost everything. You have one who all she can do is muster up enough strength to reach for Jesus. You have another that doesn't even have the ability to reach anymore for Jesus. And so you have one who places her hands on God, but the other who God places his hands on her. And I think that's important because when we're in a moment of brokenness, I think you're usually in one of those two places. You're in a place where in your brokenness, you're going, all I've got right now is the ability to reach. I don't even know how much faith I have in it, but I have enough that I can muster up that I'm gonna reach and I'm gonna trust and I'm gonna hope that as I reach, extended open hand, that you're gonna let me get hold of you and you're gonna come through for me. But then there's other times where we're at a place of brokenness. We're like, I don't even have that. I don't even know how to reach. It's been too long and too painful, and if anything's gonna change, you have to reach to me, because I can't even reach. So here's how I want us to end this morning. We're gonna do communion during the next song that we're about to do, the lyrics of which I want you to hear for a minute. They go this way, because we're gonna sing them, and I want them to start to penetrate now. All of these pieces broken and scattered, in mercy gathered, mended and whole, empty-handed but not forsaken. You take our failure, you take our weakness, you set your treasure in jars of clay. So take this heart, Lord, I'll be your vessel, the world to see your life in me. Here's what I'd like us to do. Sometimes we have the ability to reach, and sometimes we need him to reach to us. So we're gonna have communion in a moment. I'm gonna invite you to come up. There's gonna be stations up here on the stage, and there's ones around the room as well. And here's what I would invite you to do. Some of you are in a great place in life right now, and you're going, I've had those places, I've had those moments, I've needed to reach. Right now, I'm actually in a really good place. Some of us aren't. And as you come up for communion, here's what I would love to invite you to do, is I'm gonna lay this down on the stage. I would love you, after you've grabbed communion, to just make your way past the stage and just grab it. Just symbolically to say, God, I'm reaching. I'm reaching for you. I trust. I've got at least enough faith like that woman to reach and grab. And there's nothing supernatural about this. I bought it on Amazon. But it's symbolic. It's a symbolic way of saying, Jesus Christ, I'm reaching. Please reach back. But there's some of you that maybe you feel like you don't even have the ability to reach. Here's what I'm gonna offer, and this is gonna be different. I don't think we've done this since I've been here. There's gonna be a group of us down front, and I'm gonna be right here, and there's gonna be a few along the edges of the stage. If you would say, I don't even have the ability to reach, I feel like my faith is shattered, my hope is gone. I really don't know what God thinks of me right now. I don't know what I think of him. Like, would you let us pray for you? Let us reach on your behalf. And I know this is different. Like I said, we haven't done this. This is gonna be maybe even a little chaotic because there's gonna be some of you coming for communion, some for prayer. There's gonna be masses of movement. The band's gonna be playing, we're gonna be singing. It's gonna be hard to hear a lot of things. In the first service, we could make out a few words and it was enough to be able to pray. So all of that's gonna happen. But here's what I just wanna make clear. This is not just about religious motion. That we come into the building just to go through the motion. This gathering is because we believe that there is a God who stepped into creation. We killed him and he killed death. He walked out of the tomb of his own power, who promises us, when you come to me, I show up to you. When you trust me, I come through. And it's not always the ways that we want or expect, but there is healing in his wings. There is a God who has the power to mend our broken places. So I'm gonna give the next couple minutes to you. Maybe you just come for communion. Maybe that's not where you're at in your journey. Maybe you just need to still sit. Maybe you're still wrestling with whether or not there is someone to come to. And I'm glad you're in that place. Let us keep journeying with you in that process. Some of you get communion and some of you will go back. And some of you come up and grab this and then go back. But some of you will come up, grab this, and then find one of us up here and just let us do the reaching for you. Okay? Let's do it.
Holy Spirit, you are welcome here. Come flood this place and fill the atmosphere. Your glory, God, is what our hearts long for. To be overcome by your presence, Lord. Holy Spirit, you are welcome here. Come flood this place and fill the atmosphere. Your glory, God, is what our hearts long for. To be overcome by your presence, Lord. Holy Spirit, you are welcome. Welcome here. Come flood this place and fill the atmosphere. Your glory, God, is what our hearts long for. To be overcome by your presence, Lord. Your presence, Lord. Your presence, Lord. Your presence, Lord. Holy Spirit, oh Holy Spirit, you are welcome. Welcome here. Come flood this place and fill the atmosphere. Your glory, God, is what our hearts long for. To be overcome by your presence, Lord. Holy Spirit, you're welcome here. Come flood this place and fill the atmosphere. Your glory, God, is what our hearts long for. To be overcome by your presence, Lord. Your presence, your presence, Lord. Come flood our hearts, come flood our lives. Your glory, God, is what our hearts long for. To be overcome by your presence. Sing it one more time. Holy Spirit, you are welcome here. Come flood this place and fill the atmosphere. Your glory, God, is what our hearts long for. To be overcome by your presence, Lord.
That was powerful. Some of you, maybe you didn't want to come up to the front, but you still would love to have someone pray with you or pray for you. I'd love to invite you to go straight back to the right, my right of the exit doors. There's a room where you've got some people, some of which were up here, just a team of people that's what they're here to do, and let them serve you. Some of you, as you walk out these doors, maybe the reach that you need to take is actually a step. Next week is baptism, and I don't think it's a coincidence that it falls the week after this week. Because for some of us, you've been walking with God for some length of time, even if it's been a short time, but you haven't taken that step yet to say, I want to totally, completely immerse myself in you. I would just encourage you, go out to the hub before you leave, or go online and sign up to be baptized. Ask questions if you're not certain what exactly that entails or why that's an important step. I'm here, come talk to me. But I'm telling you, there's somebody in this room, maybe even somebody online, that you will be here in these waters next week, because that's the step you need to take, because it's the reach you need to make. So don't miss it. Reach that way if you need to. So thankful you guys were here today. Here's my only hope, is that you go into this week and you continue to reach with confidence that we were made by a creator who reaches back. I'm glad you were with us. We'll see you next Sunday.